You're listening to me play with Rootless jazz chords. Now these are the chords we associate with that very sophisticated jazz piano sound. There's so very many ways to make jazz chords on the piano, but it's the rootless jazz chords that give us access to all of our upper extended color tones and all of their possible alterations, and we make them all with just 4 notes in one hand. So we want to add rootless jazz chords into our chord vocabulary so that when we want that sophisticated jazz sound, we've got it at our fingertips. We're going to study our rootless jazz chords in the context of the 2-5-1 jazz progression. This will help us understand the sound of the chords and how they work together. If you don't know what the 2-5-1 pattern is, I've got a lesson for it on the website called Understanding the 2-5-1 Jazz Progression. This will let you know what it is, where it came from, what it's all about. Then you'll understand more what I'm talking about here because I refer to it all the time. There, on that lesson, we play it in a very simple way. I'm explaining the theory behind it, where it came from. Here we're going to play it in a more sophisticated way. We're evolving off of that understanding and that way of playing it. Now, before we get started on the lesson, I'd like to cover a few topics that'll help fill in the gaps so that we understand more about what I'm talking about as I'm going through the rootless chords. I mentioned chord extended jazz color tones. Let me tell you what that is. It sounds like a pretty big term. Let me see if I can explain it simply. We make all of our chords by taking every other note in our scales. And we've got a lot of scales to work with. In jazz, we're primarily working with a major scale. So let's take a major scale in C. Now we're going to build our chords by taking every other note in the scale. Let's take the C note, then we're going to go to the 3, the 5, and the 7. This is what we would call our basic jazz chord. The very first jazz chord we can make is a chord with a 7th on it. Our extended tones we can find by continuing up every other note, 9, 11, 13. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. These 3 notes on top, the 9 and 11 and 13, are what we call our extended chord. We're extending past the 7th, and we've got these 3 tones. And in jazz, we call them color tones. They add a lot of color to our harmony and to our sounds. We do a lot of playing and make a lot of our chords up here in this color tone region. When we make rootless jazz chords, we take away the root, and we're just left with these 6 tones. And our rootless jazz chords are going to involve these color tones up here. We're going to find out how we rearrange these notes and put them in our hand in a way that we can get access to these beautiful sounds of the color tones when we make our chords. Let's go to our drawing board and see if we can get more detail and description about what we're doing. Here's all of the chord tones we have possible to make all of our jazz chords with. Root, 3, 5, 7, and then 9, 11, and 13 are the jazz color tones. To make 9, 11, and 13 chords, the 7 must be present. If you take away the 7, then 9, 11, and 13 become non-color tones 2, 4, and 6. We're studying rootless chords, so we're going to do without the root. Now you can play the root sometimes in your left hand or have a bass player play it for you, but for our rootless chords, we're not going to use it. There's one color tone that we won't be using at all in this study, and that is the 11. Now there's plenty of places to use the 11 and has a great effect for us on various chords, but in this study, we won't be including it. Let's take a look at the chord types that we're going to be studying in our rootless jazz chords. If you've worked with the 5 jazz chord types video lesson, then you'll recognize these are 3 of the chords that we have out of the 5 in that study. In that lesson, we're working with a diminished chord also and a minor 7 flat 5 chord. but we're not going to include them in this study on rootless chords at all. We're just going to focus on these three chords because these are the ones that are most often used in all of our jazz playing. So we want to get these ones mastered first. These jazz chord types correlate with our 2-5-1 progression. The 2 chord is the minor jazz chord type, 5 chord the dominant jazz chord type, and the 1 chord the major jazz chord type. Now when we say chord type is because it won't be just one chord exactly that we're talking about here. It's a chord type, so there's a few ways to have a minor chord type. And there's many ways to have a dominant chord type. Now all of these chords contain a 7 except for this 6-9 chord. So we could write minor 7-9, dominant 7-13, major 7-9, but we don't. It's assumed that when you have a 9 that the 7 is included. When you have a 13, you assume the 7's there, and major 9, you assume the 7's there. Let's use the key of C as an example and just clarify exactly what we're talking about here. If we were going to write out D minor 7-9, we would write it like that, but it's really not necessary. It kind of gets messy on the page, and we know that when we say minor 9, the D minor 9, we don't need to write 7. It just looks like that. We're left with minor 9. Taking a closer look at our dominant 13 chord, we discover that we actually have a 9 in the chord as well. So we would say G, 7, 9, 13 if we were going to write the whole thing out. Now the 9 is in the study that we're using, and it's generally a tone that's added right along with the 13. You can use it or not use it, but in our study we're going to use it all the way when we play our dominant 13 chord. So we don't need to write G, 7, 9, 13. We're just going to write simply G13. And if we choose to use our option of 6-9 instead of major 9, we would write it just like it is in both cases. It doesn't contain a 7. It would just say C, 6-9, or major 6-9 jazz chord. Let's go back to this chart here that has our color tones on it and take a closer look now at how our minor 9 chord is made. It doesn't have a root, so we take the root away. And now what we're going to do is take away the 11 and take away the 13. So when we make our minor 9 chord, this is what it looks like. 3, 5, 7, 9. And now when we make our dominant 13 chord, we don't play the root. We're going to make the dominant 13. We don't use the 5. And we don't use the 11, we've got these 4 tones left that we're going to play with one hand. And for our last chord, as we go to our major jazz chord, which is going to be either major 9 or major 6-9, what we have here is we're going to take away the 13, and we're going to take away the 11. So our major 7 chord, major 9 chord, major 7-9 chord. So our major 9 chord is spelled 3-5-7-9. If we choose to use a 6-9 alternative, all we do is replace the 7 with a 6, and it looks like this, 3-5-6-9. Now let's get over to the keyboard and see what they sound like, and I'll show you the formula for making them in one hand. That's what we're striving for, is get rootless chords that we can make in one hand, whether we use our left hand or our right hand to play those chords. Now, as much as they're rootless chords, we're going to play the root in our left hand while we're learning to make them in our right hand. So that root in the left hand is going to keep us on track for what chord we're actually playing up here on the right hand that doesn't have a root. It helps us keep track of things so we don't lose our place. So I'll get the camera right overhead and move very slowly and explain everything move by move. Now all of our chords are built from either the 3rd or the 7th of the chord. This is a different concept for most people because they're used to always locating a root and then building the chord from there, adding notes on top. Well, we're not going to play that root. These are rootless chords. You always want to know where that root is, even though you're not playing it. Now, if you've worked with open voicing chords, with my open voicing lessons on the website, you're going to recognize the similarity here, because there also we had to know where the third and seventh are of every chord. So very important building points are the third and the seventh. We always want to know where they are. Let's see how to make our rootless jazz chords in the key of C. We're going to be making them in the context of the 2-5-1 jazz pattern. So in the key of C, the 2 chord starts here on the D, the 5 chord here on the G, and the 1 chord here on the C. Our first chord, the minor jazz chord, is going to be D minor 9. So here's our D, and let's build first a minor 7 here in our right hand, and then keep going up and put a 9 on top. So it's every other note using the C major scale starting on D. And here it's quite conveniently all white notes. So to get a rootless chord, we're going to just drop off the root here and be left with these 4 notes in our right hand. And it spells 3, 5, 7, 9, D minor 9. Now to get to our next chord, the 5 chord, the dominant 13, what we do is play the minor 9 and just lower 1 note a half a step. It's where our third finger is. We're going to bring it down exactly a half a step. It's the G, so I'll play the G in my left hand. This finger is going to come down to here. There's our G13 chord. So it spells 7, 9, 3, 13. Here's our G, so go up to 7, 9, 3, 13. So let's get used to making just those 2 chords first. The 2 chord, minor 9, going to the 5, lower the 1 finger. This is called the 2-5 progression, and it's very common in all jazz and jazz standard tunes. You'll often hear jazz musicians say, just play a 2-5 here, play a 2-5 there, and that's what they're referring to, this combination of chords, 2 to 5. Our last chord is the 1 chord, the major jazz chord. We want to learn how to make this in 2 different ways, as a major 7-9 and a major 6-9. Let's start with the major 7-9. I'm going to go back here to our G dominant 13 chord and see how we get to our major 7-9 from this position. I'm going to hang on to my middle finger here, the B note, and I'm going to lower the other 3 notes. The top note I'll lower 1 step, the note here on the A I'll lower 1 step, and where my thumb is I'll lower a half a step, ending up with every other note, and it's a C major 9 chord. If I put the C up here, you might see it more clearly. Here's the root, the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and the 9th. Major 7-9. Now when you're on that G13 and you're coming down to the major 7-9 chord, you hang on to this middle note, so you know that the other 3 notes have to come down, and maybe counting them in whole steps and half steps isn't the easiest way. It might be easier for you to know you've got to come down to a major 9 chord and just learn that you're making 3, 5, 7, 9 on your major 7-9 chord. Either way, your goal is to just get to this chord, and eventually you will, no matter what perspective you use, whether you're going to count your half steps and whole steps coming down from this G13, or you're just going to look for the major 9 built from the 3rd of the chord. There's the root, 3, 5, 7, 9. And now let's see how to get to our major 6-9 chord from that G13 again. If we're here on G13, every note has to come down. So we're not going to hang on to anything that exists in this G dominant 13 chord. It all is going to come down either a half step or a whole step to end up here on our C major 6-9 chord. Now the C major 6-9 chord, it's really close to the C major 7 chord. The only difference is this A here. If I lift up this A, which is the 6 of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if I lift it up a whole step, it's back to a major 7. 3, 5, 7, 9. So all that's happening is this 1 finger here, where it's holding the major 7, is coming down to 6. Major 7, 9, major 6, 9. These chords are interchangeable. You can use either one whenever you see a major jazz chord written on the page. If it says major 7, you can choose to use major 6/9 as well as major 7, and vice versa. They're interchangeable completely and often played back to back. And play it just like we were doing when we were playing the root. We were missing the root here. And we'll add the melody up high and giving it this kind of effect. So let's go up to the key of E flat and find our 2-5-1 progression. We're in the key of E flat, so the 2 chord is going to be the F. We're going to make an F minor 9 in the key of E flat. We start by making our F minor 7. Let's add the 9 up here. Let go of the root to make this chord rootless, and that's our F minor 9 chord. Put a root here. Now we're going to turn it into a 13, just like we did before. We take our middle finger, come down a half a step, and that turns it into the B flat 13 chord. B flat 9 13, and we play the root right along with it. And then we go to the 1 chord. So you can noodle around endlessly with these rootless chords, and they sound so beautiful. Now I'm going to take us back to that up-tempo version of Mary Had a Little Lamb we were working on. And I don't want you to think it's just a silly song to work on, because we're going to work with some basic elements there that we can use whenever we're playing standards. We're working with fills and a scale that we can improvise with, and some left-hand techniques that I'm going to show you. So it's a lot of fun too to have the rhythm section going. Let's take a look at it. Our chart for Mary's Hip Little Lamb here, and see how we're going to go about playing it. Now that we know how to play our 2-5-1 progression with the rootless chords, let's identify where that pattern is here on the chart. It's right here, the 2, the 5, and the 1 in the key of F, and it happens twice. But now let's take a look at what these chord symbols mean on this chart. We're using jazz shorthand here. It's typical jazz shorthand that players are using all the time now, so we want to get used to it. That little dash means minor. Jazz players often use just a dash there, and that tells us that it's a minor jazz chord, and when we're playing with our rootless chords, we're going to use a 9 there. We're going to use a minor 9 chord when we see this minor 7. Instead of playing minor 7. Now when we get to the C dominant here, we see C7 written, but in jazz shorthand, this 7 tells us that we can play 9, 11, and 13 above the chord. Instead of just playing a simple C7, we're going to automatically add a 9 or a 13. And our rootless chords are all set up for that, so we have a C13 chord here following our minor 9 chord. Now let's play it with the rhythm section here, and you're going to see this yellow light light up as the rhythm section goes through every chord. So just follow that yellow light and you can't get lost. Just follow it right along there. Here's the 2-5-1. Back. Now we start again. And now I'll start to play the chords. Here's the 2-5-1. You can't really hear that rhythm section very well if you're on an iPhone or even on your iPad. The sound's going to be very small, but if you plug into speakers or put on your headphones, you're going to hear a very loud and clear bass coming through that'll help drive your practice, and you'll hear the drums as well. I'm going to go ahead and let the track run now, and you just play along. So when you start to relax with these chords and just noodle around, you get that really nice jazz sound going with them. On my right hand, I'm pretty much playing just outlines of these chords. And that's the stuff that our fills are made out of when we're in between melodies or just creating solos.